There is a lot of parallel between the buy side and the sell side. The transaction side of it is very similar. You're just representing the opposite side of the table.
Welcome to a brand new episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast presented by Cornerstone International Alliance. I'm your host, Nick Olson. On this show, I get the opportunity to talk with the brightest minds in lower middle market M&A. Together, we discuss industry intelligence, deal management, shared successes, specialized expertise, and much more. If you serve the small to medium-sized business owner, this show will offer you tactics and insights you can use and implement now to become a master in M&A. Check, 1, 2. All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast, your go-to source for the latest industry trends and strategies to help you level up your M&A practice. I am your host, Nick Olson, Managing Director of Cornerstone International Alliance. We are a group of lower middle market M&A firms. Here we bring in masterminds who are experienced, knowledgeable, and gracious enough to share their expertise and how they've succeeded in the world of M&A. I'm really excited about today's guest. He comes from the great state of North Carolina, had over 16 years of experience in M&A. He's coined the buy-side guru within his firm. He loves hiking through the mountains of North Carolina. I hear he's a drummer and enjoys kickboxing to relieve his stress. Please welcome my guest today and partner of Business Acquisition and Merger Associates out of North Carolina, Bobby Lewis. Bobby, thank you for joining me today.
Nick, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. I'd say the backdrop was probably pre-kids. Now I've got a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, and an 8-month-old at home that gives me stress. I wouldn't say relieves my stress, but no, it's good to be here.
You guys got a busy household.
We do.
3 kids under the age of 6. Love it. Great ages, though. I have a couple of kids, too, and I miss those times. My kids are 13 and 10, so not young kids. I mean, they're young, but not little kids anymore.
Different battles at that age, I'm sure.
Exactly. I always say one of the hardest times is when they're toddlers, when they first start to run around, but you can't really reason with them. So, there's kind of like it's got a lot of chaos.
Yep.
But so Business Acquisition and Merger Associates, you guys joined Cornerstone International Alliance back at the latter end of 2023, and really excited to have you guys part of our group. But just tell us a little bit about your firm, kind of how you got started, what your specialties are, and what kind of clients you're working with.
Certainly. So Business Acquisition and Merger Associates, we go by BAMA for short. Lower middle market, traditional investment bank, providing sell-side and buy-side services. I think next year will be our 20th year in business. The firm was founded by Matt Bradbury, and our focus is primarily sell-side mandates, buy-side support. We'll support growth recapitalizations, management buyouts. I'd say collectively, we're probably more focused on general industry, so business services, manufacturing, value-add distribution. 80% of our clientele has a blue-collar workforce. So that's what we know. My family grew up in the mechanical contracting space. Matt's from Pittsburgh, and so he kind of grew up in that Rust Belt. And we just kind of steer in that lane and have enjoyed it for the past 19, 20 years together.
Awesome. Now, I know you guys have, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but at the inception of the firm, you guys did mostly sell side. Is that correct?
Yeah, early on, this predates me, but we were certainly more in the brokerage world doing some Main Street size deals, and then evolved over time into doing some lower middle market transactions. And I think Matt cut his teeth doing some smaller sell side activities. But it wasn't long. It was before I joined, Matt had already landed and closed his first buy-side transaction. So we've been doing the buy-side for at least 16, 17 years now. And it's been a pretty significant piece of our overall business. I'd say to date, it's probably close to 50-50, depending on the year, in terms of our time and energy on the buy-side and the sell-side.
Yeah, so kind of from a historical perspective, starting off doing a lot of sell side, shifting into more buy side, and over time, like you said, now you're kind of 50-50. What was that What was the thought process in the firm's stance on that? And maybe a little bit of an organizational shift to move to more buy side work than you had done initially.
It's a good question. I'm not sure if it was really by design. Kind of going back to Matt's background, he was in the fitness industry and did his own buy and build on their own account. And so I think he had 15 or so acquisitions, some turnaround situations that he supported as a COO of a healthcare organization. So he kind of came into the business with a strong pedigree on the buy side. I
Mm-hmm.
think that just naturally parlayed into what we offer today. So I had to ask him more specifically, was buy side versus sell side kind of in the back of your mind, or were you just looking for opportunities and knew you had that hunting DNA that would prove itself to be fruitful in investment banking?
Yeah, I know. As we'll kind of dive into the conversation today, we'll uncover some benefits of the buy side, which I would imagine would obviously play a role into that. But in talking with a lot of M&A advisors, I always love to hear the response to, what percentage of your practice is sell side, what percentage is buy side and valuation work and consulting work. And, most times you hear it's mostly sell side. Well, why don't you do a lot of buy side? Well, it's just more difficult. It takes longer. It's not as lucrative. Those are the kind of the things that you hear as to why, firms might not dive into that end of the pool. And so, do from your perspective, is it more difficult or not? And if so, why or why not?
Well, I'm glad the market thinks that way because it reduces the amount of competition we have out there. So it is hard. Don't do it. It's a waste of your
Yeah.
time. Uh, just kidding. But you know, all M&A is hard. It's all difficult. I think it's just a very different process and system to run a successful buy side practice. But I say like what challenges us the most, and I think this is fairly global in terms of thinking about the buy side, is you don't have a motivated, committed seller. You are working with a buyer, and there's buyers are a dime a dozen, but finding a well-run company with a motivated seller that has realistic valuation expectations, just like sourcing a sell side deal, you have to do a lot of kissing of frogs and understanding what's marketable, what's realistic, and then move forward accordingly. So I say that's the biggest challenge is just identifying the business owner who has not been actively looking to sell their business. On the buy side, it's all for us, it's all proprietary buy side searching and hunting. And so, talking to a lot of business owners who are maybe a couple years out, or it's on their radar to consider a sale, or maybe their succession plan, but they're not fully committed. So that's the biggest challenge. And then the time and energy, kicking a lot of cans, doing a lot of research, doing a lot of outreach. It's a grind. And we've learned the hard way over the years, like what you can do to be more efficient with your time and energy. But it's challenging, but it can pay dividends if you kind of get the right client, because you're only as good as your client on the buy side. And what we've enjoyed through this process is a lot of our buyers will buy multiple companies from us through one engagement. So on a economics scale, the typical fee on a buy side is lighter, but when I can do 3 deals with the same buy side client, it far and exceeds what I would do on the sell side.
Yeah, and it goes back always to the $1 million question: how do you find a business owner when he or she is ready to sell? It obviously plays a factor in the sell side, but as you just stated, in the buy side too, because you're ultimately looking for the same thing. And we'll kind of get into more of that, in a minute too. But from developing a buy side practice, or whether you're thinking, hey, I want to try the buy side. I'd like to get a couple under my belt just to say I've done it or whatever. Like, what are some things that you need to consider and be aware of that might be different from your normal sell side M&A advisory work that before you dive into that, like, you really got to think about?
The first question you'll want to ask yourself is, are you a hunter? Do you feel comfortable in more of a business development role? Because
Mm-hmm.
the biggest piece of the buy side from our practice's perspective is the origination, the sourcing side of the buy side practice. A lot of market research, a lot of outflow communications to business owners, cold solicitations, whether it's through a phone call, an email, letters, gifts, networking on social media. So you have to feel comfortable, and that's got to be a core skill set, or else you're not going to be successful. If you're just not comfortable reaching out and talking to strangers on a routine basis, if you're not comfortable hearing no on a routine basis, then the buy side can be very challenging, and possibly just suck some of the energy out of your day. But
Mhm.
I'd say if you have that personality set, the DNA to go out and be a hunter, it can be very rewarding. And
Mhm.
we know this from practice, and a lot of our cohorts in the space, they're more analytical. They don't want to be on the phone reaching out, cold calling folks, and it's just not going to be a successful path for them. So that's step one is, are you comfortable taking on that role?
Mhm.
The other side of it is, do you have bandwidth? Do you have the team to support those efforts? The buy side is, I'd say, on a man hour perspective, certainly more demanding than a sell side engagement. The sell side, it kind of, you might be, busy on one side and then kind of take a breather, and it's busy on the backside, and there's more ebbs and flows, I think, just based on a traditional sell side process. Where in a buy side engagement, typically we are on a 6-month hunt. And for 6 months, we are pouring a lot of energy and resources into that engagement. And if you're not staffed up, or if you don't have the margin in your schedule to lead that, it can be very challenging.
Yeah, you kind of transition to my next question. Differences between a sell side and a buy side practice, or being a sell side advisor compared to a buy side advisor. Any other things that are main differences in approaching that practice, besides, like I said, you got to be the hunter, you got to be a heavy business development type of person, you got to have the time, effort, and energy, and the willpower to do it. Any other things that any other nuances to a deal, maybe, or things that come up in a buy side opportunity that you might want to consider?
I mean, there is a lot of parallel between the buy side and the sell side. The transaction side of it is very similar. You're just representing the opposite side of the table. Beyond the sales and marketing, I think just being aware of the market that you're searching in, and feeling confident that you know who the players are, the business dynamics. You kind of want to specialize or know that market pretty well to talk intelligently to these prospective sellers. That's not indifferent from the sell side, but yeah, I think really just having the sales and marketing chops in your corner or in your toolbox is probably the biggest differentiator that we've seen when we talk to other bankers or brokers that are not doing the buy side. It's typically that they just don't have that team or that skill set in place.
Now, have you, in your experience, ever? Because obviously, with the amount of hours that go into it over, like I said, a 6-ish month period of time, a team is important, as you stated a couple of times. What would you caution, or what would you say to someone who's a standalone advisor looking to do buy side work? Is that, like, what advice would you give that person?
You want to know what you're getting yourself into, and knowing that you've got a good buy side client is paramount. So when we take on new engagements, whether it's some of our projects only require one person, one lead on that deal. It depends on how fragmented the space is and how much what the scope of work is for that particular engagement. But it's certainly possible to do a search with one man or woman at the helm. Some of our engagements, we have a full team of 3 or 4 individuals spending a significant amount of their daily time in that role. But if you're kind of dabbling in the buy side and kind of kickstarting with using yourself or one of your associates to lead the process, I would say be critical of who you're partnering with, who your buy side client is. What's their track record? Do they have a real strong mandate and thesis on the M&A side, or are they really just exploratory? We can't afford to waste our time on the buy side with a window shopper. So we spend a lot of time on the front end when we're talking with prospective buyers. Why are you deploying this buy side? What's the end game you have? Is this a trying to pick up a new technology or new market share? Is your entire investment thesis driven by M&A? And so, a buy and build is front and center for your firm. So understanding the nature of the buyer and their appetite to buy, you're only as good as your buy side client. And if they're really going to pull the trigger and pay a fair price, have the bedside manner, so much that the buyer controls, that's outside of the buy side advisors control, that you just got to have that front end confidence before you get in bed with somebody on the buy side.
This episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast is powered by Cornerstone International Alliance, where leading M&A firms come together. As part of this international network, you get access to global opportunities, over 200 M&A experts, enhanced collaboration and knowledge sharing, and some of the best M&A tools and resources available, all to help you take your firm to the next level. Ready to join this exclusive network? Visit cornerstoneia.com/new member today. How else can you develop that confidence? Like, are there certain questions you ask a potential buy-side client, or things that you want to look for to know, like, yeah, they're really committed to this? They're not just, tire kickers necessarily, but they really want to grow through acquisition. Anything else that you've found that's been helpful or beneficial or helped you guys succeed to picking the right clients?
I tend to steer away from first-time buyers. That's usually an area where there's a lot of learning curve involved, especially if they are, let's say, an executive buyer. Somebody's leaving a comfortable corporate position. They've got some net worth or maybe some family money to back them in a search, but they haven't gotten the green light from their wife or husband to really pursue this, to leave the security of their current role. Early on, we faced that more, where we took on some of those individual or executive buyers, and it's just, you got to feel confident that they are 100% in. You can't be 50-50. Oh, if the right opportunity comes by and it's a fair price, it's a good business. We want to know that they are committed. We charge retainers on every single buy side engagement, so we know that there's a level of commitment on their end, and it's not an insignificant amount. We want to make sure that we're covering our nut. We're also ensuring that they are going to be committed to the process going forward. So that's just understanding their motivations and their track record. I'd say 90% of the time for us, especially for the past decade, has been PE sponsored companies that are conducting some type of buy and build strategy. We know that the buyer has a mandate in place to go out and really drive growth through M&A and organic growth. We know they've got the funding and the capital partner relationships in place, and that they're experienced. They kind of know what they're doing. And a lot of times those organizations really just lean on us as an offshoot of their corporate development arm, sourcing and driving proprietary deal flow. Going back to the individual buyer who might not be as experienced in deal making, there's probably a lot more hand-holding involved. They don't know all the ins and outs of the process once it go under letter. Who do they retain for supporting due diligence? Do they have a strong transactional attorney? Do they have financing in place? What relationships do you need to bring to bear to help them execute on the deal? So again, going back to the motivation and the confidence and the track record of the buyer will just help you plan for what is coming down the pike and react accordingly. Their bedside manner and speaking with prospective sellers is strong. We've had some private equity clients in the past that are great private equity groups, and then they've got their Portco CEO who's never done a deal before, who may or may not come across as the best future CEO or partner for that seller's business. So I'd say also counsel the CEO or the senior leadership team that's going to be kind of absorbing this business through the integration process. Make sure that they are going to show well, because if they're a deadbeat on the other end of a call, or not showing enthusiasm, or not having compassion for this entrepreneur who's selling his business for the first time, it can create some more challenges for you.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that. That's a great response. What kind of clients you typically working with? Is it is it private equity backed? Is it someone who's not backed by any,
Mhm.
maybe it's a bootstrap company looking to grow? I guess what are typical type of clients you're working with, and are there any, differences amongst them?
Yeah, absolutely. We've worked with almost all of them in some capacity. Like I mentioned, the lion's share of our buy side activity is driven by private equity backed portfolio companies that have a thesis on inorganic growth. So I'd say largely those are the organizations that we know with confidence. They're usually private equity groups that we've sold companies to in the past, or
Mhm.
they've got a reputation in the marketplace as being good, fair deal makers. We think from a certainty to close and having confidence that they will get the deal done, we feel pretty strong. But private equity, they're all different. There's thousands of them out there. They've all got different personalities and approaches to the marketplace. So just because they're private equity and they're looking to roll up a market doesn't mean they're going to be the right fit for us. So we like to
Mhm.
make sure that there's that personal side and just the comfort level on the relationship front that we're going to be successful partnering together. We've worked with public companies. We've got an engagement right now with a public entity, actually based out of Europe, that's looking to enter the North American market. That's different, as you can imagine. Not just from like a language barrier and cultural barrier, but they're public and kind of go at a certain pace and have board approval, and it's been a learning experience for us. But great client, a great story. The sellers that we're engaging with see a lot of value in a potential partnership, so it's been very successful to date. And then we've worked with family-owned companies. We've worked with individuals. We've had folks that have sold a business in the past and want to use their capital to co-invest or reinvest in another business for you know their second generation or for their own experiences. But the, every buyer, regardless of whether they're public or private or PE, they're all different, and they're all going to have their own motivations and criteria. So developing that relationship on the front end to make sure that you're going to mesh and be successful together. It's pretty important. Spend time on the front end, getting to know who this partner is going to be, because you're going to be you know pretty intimate with each other for the next several months.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the fact that you want to find the right client, and whether that's public, private, or whatever. What are some tactics that you guys use to, and you mentioned also, you're finding a lot of buyers through your sell side practice. You're meeting a lot of private equity groups where maybe they were, looking at one of your sell side opportunities. What are some tactics that you use to build up that network to have a strong buy side portfolio, or, ways in which you can find, good buyers that are going to be good clients? Like what are some things that you guys do to build up that network?
Yeah. A lot of it stems from just cultivating relationships with our PE friends of the firm. We know what's in their portfolio. We know who's acquisitive, who's not. We always ask the question when we're having meetings or networking together, where are you guys seeing maybe a shortfall in your pipeline? Where do you need help? Some of these groups have great sourcing and origination teams. Like they don't need a Bama to help support them and drive new deal flow. Other groups, lack that expertise or lack that bandwidth. And so it's just kind of asking around. It's probably the easiest way to get your foot in the door is to leverage an existing relationship where there's trust in place, and you feel confident that they're going to be, motivated to really enter into a buy side engagement. That's how we've built this practice, is just leveraging relationships. And then you kind of, once you execute well on one deal or one mandate, there's a good chance they're going to give you a call the next time they have a buy side need. So a lot of our buy side work now is from clients we've used in the past that are, kicking off another mandate that requires some outside support.
Be on the lookout, because you never know where a buy side client can come from.
That's right.
Now, one of the things I've heard you guys talk about too is utilizing the buy side to benefit your sell side practice. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
There's a few ways. So when we kick off a buy side mandate, we are spending a lot of time understanding the dynamics of that market, who the players are, who the heavy hitters are, who the other acquisitive parties are. You will talk, depending on the fragmentation of the market, you will talk to dozens. In some case, we've talked to over, a couple hundred business owners in one industry. That could be on a national search. So you get to know a space really well. You can pat yourself on the back and say you're kind of a specialist or an expert in that field. So you get a lot of exposure to the market. You learn a lot about these different companies and what's working, what's not working, what business model is proven to be more successful than others. And that's valuable when you're trying to develop expertise on the sell side as well. So you're positioning yourself for success by understanding the market, and then you get to speak, like I mentioned, to a lot of business owners who may or may not be the right fit for your buy side client. So your buy side clients, they're going to have certain criterion that need to be met: EBITDA margin, scale, product mix, service mix, geography, whatever it might be. We don't know exactly when we're going out to market if that prospective seller fits the profile. So in a few examples, we could find a company that's very attractive, great, growth trajectory, great margin profile, strong team, bankable executive, and he's motivated to do something. He's maybe looking to sell or partner with somebody, but for whatever reason, our buy side client passes on that opportunity. It opens the door for us to say, "Hey, Mr. Owner, unfortunately, this is not a great fit for our client. Here's why. We want to be candid with you, but we think there's other opportunities out there that we can help you mine and execute on." There's almost always an opportunity on the buy side to find prospective sellers through that engagement if you have the bandwidth, the energy, and if you're running a sell side practice. Some shops are purely buy side and they'll just refer those opportunities out. So it kind of depends on your situation, but you will build a database, a rich database of business owners that you've had, good insight into their business. And it might not be something that you mine right away. It could be, hey, let's keep in touch down the road. You're still 3 years out from hitting a certain, valuation or milestone in your business. Let's stay in touch. And so we've got a database of a lot of business owners that have solid operations that at some point in time we might re-engage on the sell side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you said, you're talking to a lot of business owners and understanding them in the industry, and whether it's now or down the road, definitely keeping that in the back of your mind. Probably looking at it like, we got this list of 20 buyers that'd be really good, we think, or sellers for our buyer. Obviously, not all 20 of them are going to get bought, by your client. So,
Yeah.
if they've, piqued that you've piqued their interest, you can reasonably, expect them to have a quality conversation with you about, selling their own company to someone else. And that obviously makes a lot of sense to turn that prospect into a sell side engagement.
Right.
To always kind
I'll
of keep
add too,
that.
you want to make sure that you are delivering for your buyer client too. If
Oh,
you're
absolutely.
charging a retainer, and obviously, we're backloaded on the success fee. We need to get buy side deals done, and that keeps the pipeline, open for future opportunities as well. So it's great when you can get 1, 2, 3 deals done on the buy side, and then maybe you find a sell side out of it. And so that goes back to, is the buy side harder? It can be, but it can also be very fruitful if you execute well.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of to wrap up the conversation here, Bobby, I appreciate your time. Kind of some quick bullet points. What are the top 2 or 3 things, just to kind of recap our conversation for our listeners, that you want to be mindful of when looking at, whether you're in the buy side of things or you're looking to get into it, that you want to remember and be cognizant of to make sure that you are ready to take it on, because it is different.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say go back to the sales and marketing side. You feel comfortable layering that into your practice. If you're working with a buyer, on a retained basis, you have to hold yourself accountable. And so, making sure you've got the skill set to deliver on what's been expected of you, that's pretty critical. We didn't really spend a whole lot of time talking about the tools and resources to help be more effective and efficient on the buy side. There's so much technology out there. As a Cornerstone member, we have access to some pretty unique tools that we've been deploying over the past few years, and LinkedIn, social media. There's a lot of ways to identify good companies. We use trade shows as an example. We'll go to trade shows that are specific to our clients' market to hopefully meet with a lot of sellers in a short period of time under one roof. So you've got to make sure you've got systems, or you're going to be able to leverage tools. You don't want to just flip through the white pages or yellow pages to find these companies. So be mindful of the tools needed to be successful as well. And then, I think just building the right team, the right staff, the right systems to be successful, it can be a very fruitful engagement.
The question just popped in my head. How important is, when you're looking at working with buy-side client, how important is the industry? Are you guys looking to stay in industries that you've done deals in, or is it more about the client, or is it more about the industry and finding a good client within that industry?
Yeah, that's good. It always helps if you know the industry in advance. We've had several engagements where we're cutting our teeth for the very first time in this space. As I mentioned, on the sell side, we're more of a blue collar services or products type business as a firm. So we've done searches in the medical field, which is a little bit outside the fairway for us. The reality is the process is the same. We're still storytellers, we're still matchmakers, but you just got to bone up on that industry to make sure you can talk the lingo and sound credible on a conversation with the business owner. But yeah, I mean, we tend to stay and focus and solicit buy side work in spaces that we know well, and that we can probably leverage relationships or use past experiences to be more efficient. But yeah, I'd say also the other side of it too is, what does the addressable market look like on the buy side? There's a critical mass that's required, at least for our firm, to feel, a level of confidence that there's enough sellers, or the dynamic of sellers is going to prove to be sufficient to meet the needs of our buy side mandate. Are looking at huge markets that are highly fragmented, thousands of potential targets out there. How are you going to staff that? How are you going to man that? Do you have the resources to really uncover all those rocks and deliver the responses you're looking for? Conversely, there's searches where it's a very tight niche and there's maybe a dozen targets that really fit the profile of your client. And so you just need to know that on the front end to make sure, hey, if there's 12 targets out there, do I need to hunt for 6 months, or should we modify this engagement to be maybe a shorter term or driven by other metrics? But yeah, understanding the marketplace and the addressable market for that buy side clients, it's important to know on the front end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so understanding, having experience in the market, and then finding someone, and there's definitely a great way to go about it. Bobby, this conversation was amazing. I appreciate all of your great insights, and I know I learned some things. I would undoubtedly guess that our listeners did as well. So really appreciate you taking the time, sharing your expertise on all things buy side related. So appreciate you doing that. If our listeners want to know more about Bama, or have questions for you, where can we send our listeners to go find out more?
Yeah, I'd say visit our website first. We're at www.buysellyourbusiness.com. You'll find more about our buy side practice and the different tactics that we use. Also, feel free to give me a call. That's our main line here at our Charlotte office. If you've got questions on building the practice, or some of the tactics that we use specifically to be successful in the market, happy to do some mind share with you.
This whole conversation stemmed from a a mastermind session we had here at Cornerstone International Alliance with all of our principals, and it was a great conversation. We had like 10 or 15 people on the Zoom call, and we're talking buy side stuff and sharing information and collaborating and picking each other's brains and figuring out how everybody's doing what. And so that's really what our alliance is all about. And I know you and Matt were instrumental in that conversation, and made a lot of sense to talk to you, the buy side guru Bobby Lewis, about all things buy side. And so just I was sitting there through that conversation, like, we needed to make this a podcast. And so we did that today. I appreciate you doing that. And thank you so much for all of your insights on that as well today, Bobby. And that's all we have for this episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast. Definitely like, share, comment, send this episode to anyone who you think can benefit from our conversation, who wants to learn more about, developing a buy-side practice. Bobby's expertise are surely going to be helpful in helping you make that decision. You can check out all of our episodes at cornerstoneia.com/podcast. You can find our episodes on, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, all those great places. We hope you found a couple of takeaways from today's episode and our discussion from today. Thank you again for listening, and stay tuned for our next episode coming soon. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast, and a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, Cornerstone International Alliance. If you enjoyed today's discussion, don't forget to like, share, and comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. We'll be back next week with more insights, strategies, and real-life experiences to help you take your M&A game to the next level.